This is the first PowerPoint on the different types of markets, and this one will be perfect competition. As you can see from the screen, we'll be looking at down the road monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. Normal profit. Important, maybe put an asterisk next to this. It's the level of profit sufficient to keep the form in its present use. That is the technical definition of it. It's going to look on the diagram like there's zero profit. However, there's a certain amount of profit built into the cost curve or the supply curve for opportunity costs. So let's just do a quick revision. If we look at the shape of the AC, it's like a parabola. MC crosses AC at the minimum, so this is AC here, and then we have AC and MC, average cost and marginal cost. And remember, it's important that firms will produce where MC equals MR, and this is in all the types of competition, to maximize profit or minimize losses. If we look at the types of revenue and profit, sometimes students confuse the two of them. Revenue is simply money in. It's the price that's being charged and paid times the quantity. And profit, though, is the revenue, so the money in minus your costs, so it's the money you're left over with. We have accounting profit and economic profit. Accounting profit is total revenue minus the accounting costs. So these are the explicit costs, the things that you're paying out of pocket. So the payments made by a firm to outsiders in order to acquire resources for use in production. And then we looked at economic profit, and this is the one that we zero in on with these graphs. It's total revenue minus economic costs, so the total economic costs are the total opportunity costs incurred by a firm for use of resources, whether they purchase them or whether they own them themselves. And you'll remember the example that we looked at where someone had a building and they were deciding to use it themselves, but they could have rented it out. That's part of opportunity cost because it's something that's self-owned. They're not actually paying themselves to use the building, but they're giving up the rent that they could have had they chosen to rent out the property. Then you'll hear the term supernormal profit or abnormal profit, and that's a profit that's over and above normal profit, and you'll see it in the upcoming diagrams. So there's additional firm goals other than profit maximization that we need to realize can occur. It's not always profit maximization, which is the only goal. There could be revenue maximization, and in particular when we get to monopolies, we're going to look at what does it look like diagrammatically if a firm is maximizing profit versus maximizing revenue. So sales are easier to measure than profits and can be used to motivate employees. Rewards for managers and employees are often based on sales. So what often happens is an employee will get a bonus at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and it's based on, well, what were their sales? Okay, here is the bonus, and it's definitely used to motivate employees. It's very difficult to sort of wait 6 months after the fiscal year end, wait till the financial statements are prepared, reviewed, approved, and then give a commission or a bonus based on something that might have happened, 15 months ago. That's not as motivating as being able to do it almost immediately. There could be growth maximization. Maybe the company wants to get larger, so they get economies of scale where they lower their average unit cost. They might want to diversify into different products or markets. They might want greater market power and more influence over price. Managerial utility. Utility is what economists use for the term satisfaction. So increased salaries, larger fringe benefits, more staff, favored projects, that might be the goal. Or there could be satisficing firm behavior, where you've got all sorts of different objectives from many separate groups within the firm, each with their own goals and what they're trying to achieve. And more in today's world, we see the ethical and environmental concerns, so avoidance of polluting activities, engaging in environmentally sound practices, support for human rights, arts, athletic sponsorship, donations, to charities, and so on. So, some general advice for drawing cost and revenue curves. So we really want to remember for all the different kinds of competition that you want to maximize profit. You're going to produce where MC equals MR. So think of the M&M candies. So marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Once you've found that spot where the two equal, you'll bring down a dotted line to the x-axis, and you're going to call that Q, where MC equals MR. Then you're going to forget about MC equaling MR. You're going to focus on the average cost curve and the average revenue curve to establish any profit or loss, and this will become more apparent as we draw graphs. Okay, I'm going to ask you to pause your recording and read the case study for cucumbers, the perfect competition for the market for cucumbers, and then we're going to ascertain what are the characteristics of perfect competition. And often an example that's also used is dairy is milk in terms of perfect competition. I've heard strawberries being used and so on. So if you can pause this and read the next few slides. Okay, so assuming that you've read the case studies, so what are some of the characteristics? So if I asked you for a number of sellers, are there a few or are there a lot? So that tends to be very high. These aren't going to be all the characteristics, just some of them. Barriers to entry. So do you have to pay a lot of money to get into this business? Are there legal barriers? Are there patents? Do you have to sink in a lot of money? So barriers to entry and exit, are they high or low? They tend to be very low or non-existent. Are they a price maker or a price taker? They're a price taker. So whatever is the price being charged in the market is the price that each firm will then charge. And product differentiation, are the products different or are they the same? So they're identical products. Now there are some other characteristics behind this as well. We're just capturing some of the main ones. So looking at it sort of more in depth. So perfect competition occurs when market forces dictate the price and output levels of each firm. So please be aware there's market forces and then there's how the firm reacts. All right, so you're going to see in a few minutes what the market forces are versus then how that translates into an individual firm. So the structure, number of firms, large or even infinitely, an infinite number of buyers and sellers. And so each firm's output's very small in relation to other firms, and firms cannot collude because there's so many of them, and the firms act independently of each other. What happens then is that no one buyer or seller can influence the market. Free entry and exit. There's perfect knowledge amongst all firms and consumers. They know what the product is. They know what the pricing structure is, the cost structure. There's no secrets of any kind. The product differentiation, identical or homogeneous. And market power, as we said, all firms are price takers and the consumer is sovereign. Pricing and output policies, the firms operating in perfect competition is a price taker, as we said, and the price charged by the firm is the same as the price charged by the industry, and we're going to look at that, where it's going to be a horizontal demand curve because price is not going to change with quantity, and price is constant as output varies. So let's look at what happens in terms of, so please keep in mind here we've got the industry. So with the industry, you're going to draw with hopefully a ruler. I'm drawing freehand. I'm going to look at the demand. I'm going to look at the supply, bring this across, and there's no surprise here. You know that this is the equilibrium price. We're going to take that price, this is supposed to be a horizontal line, bring it across, and for the firm, this becomes the price, which is also the demand curve for the firm. Okay, and you'll see that it's perfectly horizontal, perfectly elastic, so no matter how much they sell, they're charging whatever that particular price is. Now, since the price elasticity of demand for the firm in perfect competition is perfectly elastic, if the firm were to charge more, then consumers would buy it from other firms. Because remember, there's perfect information, there's many buyers and many sellers. And so they would just simply go down the street and buy from someone else. So there'd be no market for them. Now, we also know that firms want to maximize profit, so they're not going to charge less than what this price is, because they can sell as much as they want as long as they can meet this price. And so why would they charge less because remember, they're considered to be very small compared to all the other players. They have no influence in the market. So as long as they can meet that price, they can sell as much as they want. So why would... Okay, if the PED, looking at the total revenue when PED equals infinity, if we look at this example, we have an output of 7 and total revenue is 35, and so obviously each unit is $5, and so it remains a straight line, because no matter how much you're selling, if it remains at $5, the relationship will be the same throughout the line. So looking at it this way, if we had quantity and we had price, we would have the demand curve, which equals the price, and it would be at $5. So in terms of, just a reminder about infinity, if we look at PED equals percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. We know the percentage change in quantity demanded. If we had the units for quantity, we certainly could come up with a number for the numerator. Percentage change in price is 0, and when we looked at price elasticity of demand together, when there is no change in price, when the denominator is 0, this fraction gets larger and larger and larger, very large as you approach 0, and so that's why the PED is infinity. All right, if I was in a classroom, I could easily hold up whiteboard markers. I want you to suspend your imagination for a minute and assume that this is perfect competition. Of course, it's not. Whiteboard markers vary. Some have scents to them. Some are chiseled. Some are broad. Some are refillable. The list goes on and on. But let's just imagine they're like strawberries or cucumbers, and they're identical. All right, so we're in a perfect competition market, and each marker is $2. So if I asked you, excuse me, what is the price of the markers, you would tell me $2 each. If I asked you what's the average revenue, so if you sold 5 markers, the total revenue would be 10, divided by the number of 5, and your average revenue would be $2. If I held up an additional marker and I said, so what is the revenue for the 6th marker sold? So for 1 more marker, how much would you earn? And marginal revenue would be $2. So in this type of market, it's a very particular, so we have price equals demand equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. This is the only type of market where you're going to see a straight line like this, and it will become more and more relevant as we draw the diagram. So let's actually draw a normal profit only diagram, but you'll be surprised that you already know how to draw this from what we've done with the production cost and revenue lesson and what we've learned today. So let's start off with the straight line, and we'll call it demand equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. We'll call this the price. We'll bring the average total cost curve down so it just touches. So here's average cost. We're going to bring marginal cost through the minimum. It's not quite through the minimum. You'll see it on the next diagram. It should be a little bit over here. So we're going to look at where, in order to maximize profit, produce where, and think of the M&M candies, where MC equals MR. So here's the MC, here's the MR, there's that, I'll put it more towards the middle. There's that sweet spot. And now we're going to forget about MC and MR. We're going to call this Q. And then we're going to pay attention to average revenue. So at that quantity, this whole box, so this whole area would be revenue. Then we'll look at average cost or average total cost. And see again for this quantity, all of this is going to be the cost. And we have revenue equals cost. And so we have normal profit only. It looks like there's zero profit, but opportunity cost has been built in. And there it is, drawn much nicer for you. And you can see there's the MC crossing AC, or average total cost at the minimum. And the straight line demand curve equaling average revenue and marginal revenue. Break-even price is a price that's equal to the minimum of the average total cost curve. It's where total revenues are equal to total costs, so that's what we've just been looking at. So perfect competition in the long run. So in the short run, the number of the firms cannot change because each firm has at least one fixed resource, and it cannot change that. In the long run, all of the firm's resources are variable. Therefore, the number of firms in the industry is no longer unchanging. New firms can enter the industry, existing firms can change their plant size, increase or decrease their fixed resources, or firms can liquidate or sell their fixed resources and leave the industry altogether. So therefore, as we discussed earlier, there's free entry and exit of firms in an industry, which is one of the characteristics of this market structure. So suppose now that there's a change in consumer tastes in favor of the product being sold. The industry demand curve, now industry, all right, so we're going to be looking at the downward sloping demand curve, the upward sloping supply curve. The industry demand curve shifts to the right where the market price increases, which becomes the new price that firms in the industry now accept. Firms therefore begin to earn a short-run economic profit. So let's look at this. This is the industry. Quantity and price, demand curve, supply curve, I'll call this D1, call this D2, and we see, if I'm focusing really just on the price, we've got PE or P1 here and P2 here, and the price has increased. So let's look at what happens to, at least in the short run, to a firm. Okay, so let's look at supernormal profits. So let's start off by drawing the demand curve, which equals average revenue, which equals marginal revenue, and this is the price. Now, if we're going to have supernormal profits, we need the average cost curve to go below the price so that we're earning more money than our costs. So the average cost curve, the parabola, is going to come below here. And I will call this average cost. Once again, marginal cost is going to go through the minimum, so I'm going to try and target that a little better. So marginal cost. And once again, we're going to produce where MC equals MR. So let's find that spot. Here's MC, here's MR. There they are intersecting. So I'm going to bring this down. Let's just change the color here. Bring this down. And this becomes our quantity. Once we have the quantity, ignore MC and MR. They've served their purpose. Let's focus on where it intersects, the quantity intersects average revenue. So all of this is going to be revenue. Let's look at where it intersects the average cost. Bring that across for that quantity, and this becomes the cost. So now we have revenue exceeds cost. We're going to shade in this area, and this becomes the supernormal or abnormal profit. And there it's drawn much more nicely for you. The demand curve is horizontal. You've got the average cost curve going below the demand curve. You have marginal cost going through the minimum of average cost. Once you've determined where MC equals MR, which is here, you bring that down and that becomes your quantity. Forget about MC and MR, they've served their purpose. Bring it across from average revenue, and all of this is the revenue. At that quantity, see where it intersects with average cost. All of this is your cost. And the difference between your greater revenue and your smaller cost is the abnormal or supernormal profit. In the long run, the increased profit realized by firms in the industry leads to the entry of new firms into the industry that are attracted by the prospect of making economic profits. Output in the industry increases, and as a result, the industry supply curve begins to shift to the right, and it continues to shift until the market price has fallen back to the level of the P1, the original price. At the price P1, all firms are earning normal profit once again. So that's a lot to take in, but let's look at it graphically. We're going to draw two graphs here. Okay, so perfect competition in the long run. So let's say we had supernormal profits. Okay, so let's first draw a supply and demand curve. So demand and S1, and here's the P1 where there were supernormal profits. Okay, and this P1 is going to come across here, and this is going to be our original, so this is P1, our original price equals demand equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. Okay, so then, so we've got supernormal profits going on, and so then S1 shifts to the right because you've got all these people, remember there's perfect information, they go, oh, you know what, in this market, people are making a killing, so I'm going to enter the market too, and the price goes down. So what ends up happening is that once upon a time, I'm just going to make it easier here. Once upon a time, and then I'll fill this in later, we had this happening where we had average cost, marginal cost going through the minimum, and we had, here was our revenue was all of this, and our cost was all of that, so we had supernormal profit. Then more firms come into the market. The supply curve shifts to the right, it drops it down to P2, And at P2, lo and behold, we're earning normal profit only. In the event that the market demand was to fall, the market demand curve would shift to the left, price would fall, and firms would again begin to incur losses. The long run response will be for firms to leave the industry. The industry supply curve will shift to the left up to the point that price climbs back to its original position, where it's equal to the firm's minimum ATC, and the industry's output will be reduced. So let's look at, let's see if we can draw this. Okay. So let's start off with, this is the industry. Q and P. So what happened? The market demand were to fall, and then there's losses. Okay. So D1, S, D2, and so we have P1 here and P2 there. Okay, so just bear with me for a minute. So at P1, so this is for the firm, quantity and price. Let's bring P1 across. P1. And we've got the original situation where you've got normal profits only, average cost, marginal cost, you've got D equals A, R equals M, R. And then you've got the price coming down here. And you can see that at P2, again, you would have D equals AR equals MR. You'd be producing at this point, and you would have a loss being shown. So this, at this point, would be a loss. And then you would have the situation where firms would exit the market, bringing the price back up to probably, I would imagine, P1, and the losses would disappear. So changes in technology. I'll leave this for you to read to yourself, but what would end up happening in changes in technology is if firms became more efficient, then their average cost curve is going to shift downwards. And then you will have new entrants to the industry, and the supply curve is going to shift to the right, dropping down the price of the goods as well. So you would have the technology bringing down the costs, and then you would have new entrants, industry supply curve shifting to the right, and the price of the good coming down. So let's look at perfect competition short run loss. We kind of drew a short one there before. But let's start off with, here we've got the demand equals the price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue, and this is at the price. So if we have short run loss, we're not covering our costs, so our costs are going to come up here. So average cost, we're going to swoop marginal cost through the minimum. And we are going to produce once again to either maximize profits or to, in this case, minimize loss. You're going to produce, think of the M&M candies. MC equals MR. So here's MC, here's MR, there's the spot. So we'll bring that down, and that becomes our quantity. Then we're going to ignore everything to do with MC and MR and focus on average costs and average revenue. So we know at this point, this is where it's meeting average revenue. So we have revenue here, but we've got to extend this line up now to where it meets average cost. And all of this is the cost. And so the costs exceed the revenue, so this becomes the loss. And then, as I said, firms would start to leave the market in the industry. So think of the downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve for the industry. Industry supply curve shifts left, and the price would be driven back up. So short run loss there, drawn more nicely for you than mine by hand. Okay, a shutdown position. So when are you going to just shut down and walk away? So let's have this here, and let's have demand equals price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue, and this again is the firm. Okay, so we're not even making our costs. So our average variable costs are going to be here. Average total cost is even higher because it includes the fixed costs. So at this point, everything you're selling, you're going further and further in debt. You might as well shut down and call it a day. And so you're not even meeting your variable costs. So allocative and productive efficiency. So this becomes important with the new syllabus for the IB. So we've gone through all that work, which is necessary, but this is really where it is key, and more so with the allocative efficiency. The productive efficiency really isn't stressed in the new syllabus. So competitive markets achieve economic, allocative, and productive efficiency achieved by perfect competition in the long run. So you don't have any losses, you don't have any supernormal or abnormal profits. Allocative efficiency occurs when firms produce the particular combination of goods and services that consumers mostly prefer. So, excuse me, if you remember the cleaning up the beach activity, you told me at some point to stop because the costs were going to exceed the benefits, or the marginal cost for cleaning up one more unit would exceed the marginal benefit for cleaning up one more unit. So you said stop where MB equals MC. So that's the place where allocative efficiency happens. Now MB is the same thing as the demand curve, and that is going to determine price. So this condition can be restated as price equals marginal cost. Productive efficiency occurs when firms produced at the lowest possible cost. The condition for productive efficiency is the following. Productive efficiency is achieved when P equals the minimum of average total cost. Production of the good uses up the least amount of resources available. So let's look at what's actually going on here. So just a second. Okay. So allocative efficiency. So if I asked you, does P equal marginal cost? So again, you're going to produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So you're going to produce there at that quantity. And here's the price that's being charged. You know it's the price because it's the price that also is part of this demand curve, average revenue and marginal revenue. So the price does indeed, at this quantity, equal marginal cost. So the answer is yes. Is it productive efficiency? So again, at this quantity, are you at the minimum of average cost or average total cost? So, I mean, yes, so are you producing, so you're producing at the minimum of average total cost? And the answer is yes, average total cost. Okay, so you do have allocative and productive efficiency, so you don't have market failure. So evaluating perfect competition. So you have the allocative efficiency. So perfect competition leads to the best or optimal allocation of resources based on the mix of goods and services that consumers mostly want, achieved through that P equals MC. So try to remember that, because remember, the IB new syllabus is really focusing on, is there market failure? And you do not have market failure if you have allocative efficiency and you're producing basically what society wants you to at the quantity and at the price. Productive efficiency, because you're avoiding waste of resources and producing at the minimum of average total cost. You have low prices for consumers due to A, the production at the lowest possible cost, achievement of productive efficiency. B, the absence of economic profit. So remember, I told you on the graph it'll look like there's not any profits, but there are, your opportunity cost is met. Otherwise, if you had economic profits, you'd have a higher price. And competition leads to the closing down of inefficient producers because they have to meet the existing price or go out of business. The market responds to consumers' tastes. So changes in the consumer tastes are reflected in changes in market demand and therefore market price. By creating short-run economic profits or losses, price changes result in long-run adjustments that make the quantity of output produced by the industry respond to consumer tastes. So remember, before we saw the demand curve for the industry increasing or decreasing, and then the industry responded and changes were made. The market responds to changes in technology or resource prices. So we talked about if there's better technology, the average cost curve would come down. There would be supernormal profits, at least in the short run. Other firms would enter the industry and the price would be driven down. Limitations, though. Certainly unrealistic assumptions. So the model rests on strict and unrealistic assumptions that are rarely met in the real world. So I used the example early on about dairy products, like milk, I should say, as being an example of perfect competition. But even within milk, they try to differentiate pure, filtered, organic, and so on and so forth, long-lasting shelf life. It's very hard to say that milk is milk. The same thing with bottled water. Some of it comes from natural springs, some comes here, some comes to a certain filtration system. So very difficult to find something that's absolutely identical. Limited possibilities take advantages of economies of scales. So you can't benefit from, because most industries are small, and it prevents them from growing to a size large enough to take advantage of economies of scale, where as you get bigger, your average cost per unit goes down. Lack of product variety, so everything's identical, and so this is a disadvantage if you happen to be someone who likes product variety. You could have a waste of resources with you've got continuous opening and closing of firms. That takes resources to do that. Limited ability to engage in research and development because again you don't have the supernormal profit, and that limits what you can and cannot do. I'm leaving these questions in, but at this point not assigning them, but it does show you, gives you an idea of what you may be asked to do, in an IB exam or question. Thank you.